Elias Vance mopped the 19th floor of a tower he'd never be invited into. 22 years. Same gray cart, same gray water, same hum of the fluorescent lights over the same wide floor. That morning, a junior analyst named Trevor Dunn flicked a coffee stirrer onto the wet tile Elias had just cleaned. It landed with a little tick. Trevor grinned at his friends. "Careful, Picasso," he said. The break room laughed. Elias didn't argue. He didn't even look up. He bent down, wiped the mark away, and tucked his notebook a little tighter under his arm. That was Tuesday. By Friday, it was worse. The office manager, Brett Halloran, wanted the floor's laugh, and Brett always got what he wanted. At the all-hands meeting, in front of 40 people, he lifted Elias's taped spine notebook off the supply cart and held it out over the trash can. "Careful, everyone," Brett said. "The janitor's got a masterpiece." 40 phones came up. 40 faces waited. And Elias, 58 years old, stood there with his hands at his sides. By the elevator, a woman was watching. Her name was Diane Wexler. She owned the gallery downstairs, and she'd glanced over his shoulder once, days before, at a single open page, and she had gone very, very still. If you believe respect is earned in silence, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this one move you, subscribe, because I tell them here every week. And do me a small favor. Comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elias travels tonight. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, before any of them knew who they were laughing at. The thing you have to understand about Elias Vance is that he was never in a hurry. 58 years old, wide across the shoulders, going soft at the middle, gray coming in at the temples like frost on a window. He had a slow way of moving that people mistook for dullness. It wasn't dullness. It was a man who had learned a long time ago that most things don't need to be rushed. The floor would still be there. The mop would still be there. The morning would come, whether he hurried it or not. He'd cleaned the Hartwell Meridian Group Tower for 22 years. He knew it better than anyone who worked in it. He knew which elevator stuck between the 11th and 12th floors on cold mornings. He knew that the men's room on 14 had a slow leak that maintenance kept promising to fix. He knew the stairwells, all of them, the way you know the rooms of your own house in the dark. He'd walked them 10,000 times. And on his breaks, most days, he drew them. That was the other thing about Elias. He drew. He had drawn since he was a boy, since before he could spell his own name properly. And he had never stopped. 40 years of it. He carried a notebook with a spine held together by silver duct tape, and on his 15-minute breaks, he would sit at the same corner table in the 19th floor break room, and he would open it, and he would work in silence. He drew the stairwells. He drew the way the light came through the lobby glass at 7 in the morning. He drew the people on the bus he took home, the tired ones, the ones asleep against the window with their mouths open. He drew his hands. And in the corner of every single drawing, small, so small, most people would never notice it, he drew a sparrow, a little brown bird, wings half open, always in the same lower corner. He'd been doing that since he was 9 years old. His mother had a sparrow that came to her kitchen window, and she'd told him it meant a house was watched over. He never explained it to anyone. It was just his. His signature, though he'd never have used a word that grand for it. He drew Nora most of all. Nora was 16. She was his granddaughter, and she was the reason he got up in the mornings. Her mother, Elias's daughter, had died when Nora was 12. It was an overdose. Elias didn't talk about it. He'd gotten the phone call at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday, and by that evening, he'd become a father again at 54. To a grieving 12-year-old girl who wouldn't eat and wouldn't sleep and wouldn't look at him. He didn't push. He just sat with her. He cooked what he could. He learned how to braid hair off a video on the library computer because he was too proud to ask a neighbor. And slowly, over months, over years, the girl came back to life in his small apartment. He drew her sleeping. He'd sit at the kitchen table late at night after his shift, and the light from the hall would fall across her face, and he would draw her. Not to keep. Just because his hands wanted to. Those were the drawings he never showed a soul. Here is what Elias believed, deep down, and it mattered, so hold on to it. He believed his drawings were worth nothing to anybody but himself, a private comfort, like humming, like the way some men whittle or fish. He didn't think he was good. He thought he was a man who liked to draw, the way you might like a certain chair. When people at the office called him Picasso, it stung. But it stung the way any cruelty stings. It never once occurred to him that they might be closer to the truth than they knew. The people at the office did not see any of this. They saw a heavy-set older man in gray coveralls who emptied their trash and buffed their floors and never spoke much. To them, he was furniture. Useful furniture, but furniture. And to a certain kind of young man on that floor, he was something to sharpen a joke on. Trevor Dunn was 26. He wore good shoes, and he laughed loud, and he had a talent for finding the soft spot in a room and pressing on it. It was Trevor who started the Picasso thing. He'd seen Elias drawing at the corner table one afternoon, wandered over, looked at the open page, and said, loud enough for the whole break room, "Oh, we've got a real artist here. It's Picasso." And people laughed. Not because it was funny, because Trevor was the kind of person whose approval you wanted, and laughing was cheap, and the janitor wasn't going to do anything about it. So it stuck. Picasso, they'd say it when he passed with his cart. Morning, Picasso, they'd say it when he mopped near their desks. Trevor would flick something onto the wet floor and call him Picasso, and the little clique around him would grin. Elias would clean it up. He'd tuck his notebook tighter under his arm, the way a man protects the one soft thing he's carrying, and he'd move on. One afternoon in the break room, there was a flyer on the corner table. It was glossy, expensive looking. A gallery flyer. Wexler Contemporary, it said, ground floor of the building. A show opening in a few weeks. There was a photograph of a painting on it, something modern and severe. Elias sat down with his coffee, and he looked at that flyer for a long time. Longer than a man usually looks at a flyer. His thumb moved over the edge of it. His face didn't change, but something behind it did. Trevor's friend, a girl named Kayla, noticed. "You into art? Picasso?" she said, half teasing. Elias set the flyer down. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in that low, unhurried voice, "I sold one once. Years back." Nobody heard it as anything. Kayla had already turned back to her phone. Somebody laughed at something on a screen. The words fell into the room and vanished, the way most true things do when nobody's ready for them. "I sold one once. Years back." He didn't say what. He didn't say for how much. He didn't say the name the art world had given the man who made it. He just picked up his coffee and his notebook and went back to work. Hold on to that line. It's going to matter more than anything else in this story. That evening, when Elias got home, Nora was waiting for him at the door, and she was holding an envelope, and she was shaking. "Grandpa," she said. "Grandpa, it came. It was from the art school." She'd applied in the fall, in secret almost, because she hadn't wanted to want it too loudly in case it didn't happen. Nora drew too, of course she did. She'd grown up watching him at that kitchen table, and somewhere in those years the thing that lived in his hands had passed into hers. Her work was different from his, bolder, angrier, full of color, where his was quiet and gray. But it was real, and her teachers had seen it, and she had applied to the one program in the state that could do something with a girl like her. She'd gotten in. Elias read the letter twice. He was smiling, and his eyes were wet, and Nora was jumping a little on the balls of her feet. And for a moment, the small apartment was the happiest place in the city of Cleveland. Then he got to the second page. The deposit was $14,200. To hold her seat, it was due in 21 days. After that, the letter said, kindly, in the soft language institutions used for terrible things, the place would be offered to the next student on the list. Elias read that number a third time. $14,200. He made, after 22 years, a little over $16 an hour. He had, in the account he thought of as savings, something under $900. And on the refrigerator, held there by a magnet shaped like a strawberry that Nora had loved since she was small, was a shut-off notice from the gas and electric company. Because, that month, like a lot of months, there hadn't been quite enough. He didn't let his face change. He'd gotten very good over the years at not letting his face change. That's wonderful, he said, and he meant it. He meant it with everything in him. That's wonderful, sweetheart. We'll figure it out. Grandpa, it's a lot of money. We'll figure it out, he said again. And he folded the letter carefully along its creases and set it on the counter. And he did not look at the shut-off notice on the fridge. And Nora, who was 16 and sharp and saw more than he wanted her to, looked at it for him. So now you know the shape of it. A man who thinks his gift is worth nothing, carrying a girl's whole future on his back. With 21 days on the clock and $900 in the bank. The worth he doesn't know he has, sitting on one side of the scale. The money he can't find, sitting on the other. Remember that. It's the whole story, really. The rest is just how long it takes the world to notice. The Friday meeting was Brett Halloran's idea. Brett was 41, and he was the office manager, which on the 19th floor meant he was king of a very small country. He wasn't smart, exactly, but he was loud, and he'd learned that loud can pass for strong if the room is scared enough. He ran a Friday all-hands at 4 o'clock, and he ran it like a talk show host, roaming the floor with a wireless mic, cracking jokes, calling people out, making sure everyone remembered whose floor it was. That Friday, Elias was doing what he always did during the all-hands. He was at the edge of the room, quiet, waiting for it to end so he could get back to work. His cart was near the wall. His notebook was on the top shelf of the cart, where he always left it, the taped spine facing out. And Brett, prowling, looking for the day's laugh, saw it. You could watch the idea arrive on his face. He walked over, slow playing to the room. Now what's this, he said into the mic. What do we have here? He picked up the notebook, held it up. Whose is this? Elias took a step forward. That's mine, Mr. Halloran, that's mine, Mr. Halloran, Brett repeated, in a voice, a slow, dumb voice, and the room laughed because the room always laughed. He opened it, turned a few pages. His eyebrows went up in mock wonder. Would you look at this? We've got a genuine artist on staff. Trevor was right. It's Picasso. He turned the pages toward the room so people could see. Sketches of stairwells. A sleeping girl. A sparrow in the corner. Careful, everyone. The janitor's got a masterpiece. 40 phones came up. You could hear them. That soft rustle of a room lifting its cameras at once. And then Brett walked to the trash can in the corner of the room, the big gray one by the water cooler, and he held the notebook out over it. Mr. Halloran, Elias said. He wasn't loud. He'd never been loud. But there was something in his voice now that hadn't been there a moment ago. Please. Relax, Picasso. Brett was grinning at the phones. I'm just saying. A man's got to know his lane, right? You push the mop. You leave the art to the professionals. He dangled it lower. This where you keep your masterpiece? In the trash where it belongs? Elias reached for it, and Brett dropped it in. It fell into the can with a wet sound, because there was a half a cup of somebody's cold coffee down there, and old coffee grounds, and the day's garbage. The room made a noise, a kind of collective ooh, half shock and half delight. Somebody laughed out loud. Trevor, near the front, was filming with both hands. Elias didn't shout. He didn't grab Brett. A younger man might have. A prouder man might have. But Elias had learned, a long time ago, in rooms harder than this one, that giving them the reaction is giving them the win. He walked to the trash can. He reached in, past the garbage, and he lifted his notebook out. Coffee dripped off it. The pages were soaked at the bottom edge, brown and swollen. He held it a moment, letting it drip. Then he took the rag from his belt, and right there, in front of 40 people and 40 phones, he began, slowly, page by page, to wipe the coffee grounds off his drawings. He didn't look at anyone. He wiped one page, turned it, wiped the next. His big hands were gentle. He worked the way you'd clean a wound. Brett watched him do it, and for 1 second, one single second, something crossed the office manager's face that might have been shame. But there were 40 people watching him too, and a man like Brett would rather do anything than lose the room. So he covered it. He clapped Elias on the shoulder, hard, and he leaned into the mic, and he delivered the line he'd remember for the rest of his life, whether he wanted to or not. "Stick to the mop, Rembrandt," the room roared. And Trevor got all of it on video. Elias finished wiping the last page. He closed the notebook. He tucked it under his arm, against his chest, the way you'd hold something living. And he pushed his cart out of the room, down the long hall, toward the supply closet. And he did not run, and he did not cry, and he did not look back. The video was in the office group chat before he reached the closet. Trevor captioned it. Something small and cruel, the kind of thing that gets a laugh and cost the person who wrote it nothing. Or so he thought. And it spread. That's the thing about those videos. They spread. It went floor to floor. It went to people who'd never met Elias, never seen his face, would never clean up after themselves in their lives. The janitor and his masterpiece. The trash can. Rembrandt, by 5 o'clock, people 3 floors down were watching a 58-year-old man fish his life's work out of the garbage and wipe the coffee off it, and they were laughing. Or worse, they were sending the little crying, laughing faces, which is how a person laughs when they don't even have to mean it. Elias walked the long hallway back to the supply closet. 40 faces had watched him. Now, as he passed the desks, more of them looked up, because they'd all seen it by now, and some of them smirked, and some of them looked away fast, which is its own kind of cruelty. The looking away. He didn't cry. I want you to know that. Not because he was too strong to. Because he was somewhere past crying, in that quiet, cold country a person goes to when they've been made small in public, and there's nothing to do but keep walking. He reached the closet. He turned on the little light. And he took the notebook, still damp, still smelling of coffee, and he set it on the shelf above his cart. He set it down carefully, squared it to the edge of the shelf, the way you'd set down something sacred. Then he turned off the light, and he went back to work, because the floors on 12 still needed doing, and the man didn't have the luxury of a bad day. Now, here is where the world begins, very quietly, to tilt. Diane Wexler owned the gallery on the ground floor of that same tower. Wexler Contemporary. She'd been in the business for 25 years, and she had a reputation as one of the sharpest eyes in the Midwest. She could walk into a room of 200 paintings and find the one that mattered in under a minute. It was a gift, and it was a discipline, both, and she'd built a whole career on it. She was also, that month, in trouble. She had a show opening in a few weeks, the biggest of her career, the kind of show that brings collectors in from New York and Chicago, the kind that can make a gallery or break it. And the marquee artist, the one whose work was going to anchor the whole thing, the one whose name was on the invitations, he'd pulled out. 3 weeks before opening. A better offer somewhere else, an agent's phone call, and just like that, Diane had a career-defining show with a hole in the middle of it. An empty centerpiece wall, a room of the most important people she knew, coming to see nothing. She hadn't slept properly in a week. She rode the building elevators a lot, because her office was on the ground floor, but her framer and her storage were up on 23, and so she went up and down that tower 10 times a day. And a few days before the Friday meeting, she'd shared an elevator with the janitor. She hadn't paid him any attention at first. Why would she? He was a big, quiet man in gray coveralls with a cart, and she was drowning in her own problems. But he'd been holding a notebook, and on the ride up he'd been sketching, just idly, the way some people check their phone. And Diane's eye, that trained, disciplined, involuntary eye, had drifted down to the open page. And she'd gone still. She didn't know why, at first. That was the strange part. She'd tell people later that she felt it before she understood it. A drawing of the elevator's own doors, done in maybe 40 seconds, in ballpoint pen. And it was alive. The line was impossible. Confident and loose and exactly right, the kind of line you cannot teach and cannot fake and see maybe 3 times in a career. And in the corner, small, a little bird. The elevator doors had opened on her floor before she could say anything. She'd stepped out on instinct, and by the time she turned around, the doors had closed, and the man was gone. She'd thought about it for 3 days. That line, that bird. It nagged at her the way a name you can't remember nags at you. So the day after the Friday meeting, she hadn't seen the video. She wasn't on the office chat. She moved in a different world entirely. Diane got into the elevator on the ground floor, and the janitor was in it, alone with his cart. And he was drawing again. She stood next to him. She watched his hands. Ink-stained fingers, she noticed. Permanent. That kind of stain. The kind that never washes out. The mark of a man who'd had a pen in his hand every day for 50 years. And on the page, the bird again. The same little sparrow. That's beautiful, she said. Elias closed the notebook. Not fast. Just closed it. The way you'd close a door you didn't want a stranger looking through. Thank you, he said. I mean it. I own the gallery downstairs. I know a little about drawing. She stopped, choosing her words, because she'd learned that if you come at people like this too hard, they bolt. That's a very unusual hand. Have you shown your work anywhere? No, ma'am, Elias said. Would you let me see more of it? I'd like to. Genuinely. And Elias looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. A well-dressed woman with sharp eyes and an expensive coat, asking to see his notebook, one day after 40 people had watched it go into the trash. And whatever he saw in her face, or whatever he was carrying from the day before, it made him close all the way up. No, he said, gently but firmly. But thank you. The doors opened. It was his floor. He pushed his cart out, and he was gone, and Diane Wexler stood in the elevator with her mouth half open, and the doors sliding shut on the second time in a week that this man had vanished before she could catch him. She stood there, and she thought. Ink-stained hands. A sparrow. That line. I sold one once. She didn't know he'd said that last part. But she was a woman who'd spent 25 years in a certain world, and there was something surfacing in her, slow, from way down deep. A story she half remembered, an auction, years ago. A drawing that had sold for real money to a real collector, signed with nothing but a small bird, artist unknown. The trade had a nickname for whoever it was, because the trade always needs a name. She couldn't quite reach it. Not yet. But it was there. Meanwhile, the clock on Nora's future kept running. Elias tried everything a man in his position tries. He asked the building about extra hours. There weren't any. He went to a check cashing place downtown, the kind with the yellow sign, and a very polite young man explained the interest rate to him, and Elias thanked him, and left. Because he could do arithmetic, and he wasn't going to trade one drowning for a worse one. He looked, for one long terrible evening, at the little strawberry magnet and the shut-off notice, and he did the sum in his head, over and over, and it never came out different. $14,200. 21 days, then 14 days, then 11. He didn't tell Nora how bad it was. She knew anyway. She started saying things like, "It's fine, Grandpa, I can go next year, and it's not even that good a school, honestly." And every one of those little lies she told to make it easier for him landed on him like a stone, because he knew exactly what they cost her to say. She'd start college late, or never. She'd take the job at the pharmacy full-time. She'd become one more person who'd had it in her hands and had to set it down. And the thing that lived in her hands, the same thing that lived in his, would go quiet, the way it goes quiet in most people, and stay quiet for good. He couldn't let that happen. He just didn't know how to stop it. He thought about the notebook. Once, late at night, he thought about the woman in the elevator, the gallery owner, and the way she'd said that's beautiful, and for one strange moment he let himself imagine that maybe there was money in it. Somehow, maybe a man could. And then he stopped himself. Because he'd believed one thing his whole life, and you don't unbelieve a thing like that in one night at a kitchen table. His drawings were worth nothing to anybody. They were a comfort, a habit, a private thing, like the sparrow. Selling one had been a fluke, a strange accident from a strange season of his life a long time ago, and he'd never understood it and never repeated it. To think it could save Nora, that was just cruelty he'd be doing to himself. Better not to hope. He'd learn that too, in rooms harder than the 19th floor, so he set it aside. He kept mopping. He kept drawing on his breaks, at the corner table, because the man couldn't not draw any more than he could not breathe. And the office kept at him too, because that video had given them something, and they weren't done with it. Trevor took to mimicking him at lunch. He'd hunch his shoulders, drop his voice, pretend to dab at a page with tiny precious strokes. "Look at me," he'd say. "I'm Picasso. I make masterpieces. I keep 'em in the trash." And the clique would laugh, and it would carry across the break room to where Elias sat alone at his corner table. And he'd hear every word of it, and he'd keep drawing. He drew Nora. He drew the bus. He drew a sparrow in the corner. And 2 floors down, in ways he could not begin to imagine, a woman was starting to remember his name, the name he'd never told her, and a show with a hole in the middle of it was waiting for the one thing that could fill it. Diane's problem got worse before it got better. Her assistant quit. A shipment of frames came in damaged. And every morning the empty centerpiece wall stared at her across the gallery. And every morning she thought about the janitor and his line and his little bird, and she couldn't shake it. And she couldn't reach it. And she was running out of days too. 2 clocks. That's what I need you to hold in your mind now. Nora's clock, 9 days and shrinking. And Diane's clock, the show, the collectors, the empty wall, 3 weeks and shrinking. 2 people racing 2 different deadlines, in the same tower. One of them holding the answer to the other's problem and not knowing it. The other one starting, slowly, to suspect. They ran toward each other without knowing it. That's how these things go. The whole world is people carrying the answers to each other's problems, passing in elevators, and mostly they never get off on the same floor at the same time. Mostly the doors close first, but not always. It was a Thursday, late, near closing. Nora's deadline was 9 days out. Diane had spent the whole day with collectors and framers and a knot in her stomach. And at 8 o'clock she was still in the building, riding up to 23 to check on a piece, alone and exhausted. And on the way back down, the elevator stopped on 19, and the doors opened, and there he was. Elias, mopping, alone on the empty floor. All the analysts gone home, all the phones dark, the whole cruel bright kingdom of the 19th floor emptied out to nothing but a heavy-set man and a bucket and the long clean shine of a wet floor under the night lights. Diane held the door. She stepped out. "I know you told me no," she said, "and I'm not going to be a pest, but I have to tell you something, and then I'll leave you alone if you want me to." Elias stood with the mop in his hands. He didn't say anything. He'd learned that not saying anything is usually the wiser thing. "I own the gallery downstairs," Diane said. "I've been doing this 25 years. I have seen thousands of artists, tens of thousands of drawings. And I want you to understand that I do not say this to people, ever, because it isn't true about almost anyone." She took a breath. Her voice, when it came again, was not the voice of a woman making a pitch. It was quieter than that. It was almost afraid. The line you have in that book. I saw it for 4 seconds in an elevator, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. That's not flattery. I don't flatter. I'm telling you that in 25 years I've seen a hand like yours maybe 3 times. Maybe. Elias looked at the floor he'd just cleaned. And the bird, Diane said, softer still, watching his face now, watching for it. The little sparrow. In the corner. You put it in every one, don't you? And that got him. You could see it. His eyes came up off the floor. Because nobody in 50 years had ever noticed the bird and understood that it meant something. His granddaughter knew. His mother had known, long ago. And now this stranger, this sharp-eyed woman in the empty office at 8 at night, had seen it in 4 seconds and named it. And there is a particular loneliness that breaks the moment someone finally sees the thing you thought only you could see. Please, Diane said. I'm not asking to buy anything. I'm not asking for anything. I'm asking to look. Just to look. One time. And if you say no again, I swear to you I'll get back in this elevator and I'll never bother you again. The floor gleamed under the night lights. Somewhere a machine hummed. Elias Vance stood there a long moment, a man who had believed one thing his whole life, holding a mop on the 19th floor of a tower he'd never been invited into. With 9 days on his granddaughter's clock and $900 in the bank and a notebook on the shelf in the supply closet that still smelled faintly of another man's coffee. He set the mop against the cart. He walked to the closet. Diane didn't follow. She just waited, hardly breathing, in the middle of the empty floor. And he came back with the notebook, the taped spine, the swollen coffee brown edge, and he held it a moment against his chest the way he always did. And then without a word, he held it out to her. That was the whole thing. No speech, no deal, no name dropped, no price named, no I sold one once. Just a man, finally, after a lifetime, letting one person look. He asked for nothing. He didn't even know what he was giving her. He thought he was handing a kind woman a book of his doodles to be polite, so she'd see they were nothing much, and leave him be. Diane took it in both hands like it was made of glass. She opened it. She stood there on the 19th floor at 8 at night, and she turned to the first page, and Elias watched her face, and her face changed. It went from hope to something else, something that scared him a little. Her hand came up to her mouth. She turned a page, turned another, and she made a small sound, low in her throat. The sound a person makes when the thing in front of them is bigger than they were ready for. Oh, she said, very quietly. Oh no, Elias frowned. Ma'am? But Diane wasn't listening to him anymore. She was 3 pages in, and her eyes were moving over the line the way you'd move your hands over a fire on a cold night, and something was surfacing in her, all the way up now, the thing she hadn't been able to reach for 2 weeks. The auction. 11 years ago. Chicago. A single drawing, signed with nothing but a small brown bird. Sold for more than anyone expected to a collector who'd flown in just for it. Artist unknown. The trade had needed a name, and so the trade had given it one, off the only mark on the page. She turned another page. The same bird looked back at her. Sir, Diane said, and her voice was not steady anymore, and she looked up at him over the notebook with an expression he had never once in his life had aimed at him, an expression somewhere between reverence and fear. Sir, where did you get this? These are yours? You drew all of these? Yes, ma'am, Elias said, uneasy now. It's just something I do. On my breaks. And Diane Wexler looked down at the little sparrow in the corner of the page, and then up at the janitor in his gray coveralls, and she opened her mouth to say the name that the whole art world had been chasing for 11 years. She said, Sparrow. Just that. One word. And Elias didn't understand it, not at first. He looked at her the way you'd look at someone speaking a language you almost knew. "That's not a name," he said. "That's just a bird I draw." "No," Diane shook her head slowly. She was still holding the notebook open against her chest now, both arms around it, like she was afraid the wind would take it. 12 floors up. Indoors. No wind at all. "No, sir. It's a name. It's been a name for 11 years. You just never heard anybody use it." Elias didn't say anything. He'd learned a long time ago that the quiet was safer than the question. 11 years ago there was an auction in Chicago, Diane said. A small one. A single drawing came through. Ink and graphite. A woman on a bus, asleep, her head against the glass. And in the bottom corner, this small brown bird. She turned a page toward him without looking down. There it was. The same woman. The same bird. Nobody knew who made it. It sold for $61,000 to a man who flew in from Basel just to bid. And the trade had to call the artist something. So they called him Sparrow. And they've been looking for him ever since. 61,000, Elias said. Dollars? Yes. He set his hand on the edge of the mop bucket. He needed to hold something. 26 years ago, he had walked into a pawn shop with 3 drawings in a folder because the rent was late, and a man had given him a card, and a few weeks later, a check had come, and he'd cashed it and paid the rent and never asked another thing. He hadn't known the number. He hadn't wanted to know the number. Knowing the number felt like the kind of thing that got taken away. "I sold one," he said, "years back. I told them at lunch. Nobody heard me." "They weren't listening," Diane said. She looked at him then. Really looked. A gray-haired man in gray coveralls, 58 years old, holding a mop on the 19th floor of a building he cleaned at night. And she started to cry. Quietly, the way you cry when something you'd given up on turns out to have been sitting in front of you the whole time. "I have a show," she said. 3 weeks out. My centerpiece pulled out on me. Left me a wall with nothing on it and a room of people coming to see something. She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. "Mr. Vance, would you let me put these on that wall?" Elias thought about Nora. That was the truth of it. He didn't think about galleries or names or Basel. He thought about the deposit on the fridge and the shut-off notice under the strawberry magnet and the 9 days left on the clock and the something under $900 in the account. "I have more," he said. Very slowly, like the words cost him. "In a storage unit. Off 55th. Been putting them there for years. Didn't have the wall space at home." Diane went very still. "How many?" she said. "I never counted." She closed the notebook. She held it out to him with both hands, the way she'd taken it, and he took it back, and for a second the two of them just stood there, holding opposite ends of it. "Don't clean tonight," she said. "Please, sit down. Let me make some calls." But Elias finished his floor. Of course he did. 22 years, you don't leave a floor half done because a woman cried. He mopped to the elevator and back, and he emptied the cans, and he set the notebook on the shelf of his cart the way he always did. Gentle, spine up. And when he was done, he went home on the bus and drew a man across the aisle who was sleeping with his mouth open. And he put a small bird in the corner, out of habit, the way he'd done since he was a boy. He didn't tell Nora. Not yet. He didn't want to hand her a thing and then have to take it back. 2 floors down and 11 days deep into her own quiet panic, Diane Wexler did not sleep. She sat on the floor of her gallery with the storage unit key Elias had given her, and a flashlight, and a lawyer on the phone at midnight who told her to slow down, and she told him she could not slow down. In the morning she drove to the unit off East 55th, and Elias met her there in his good coat, the only one he had, and he rolled up the metal door. She had prepared herself. She had told herself, on the drive over, "Do not expect too much. It is one notebook and a memory. Do not build a cathedral out of a sparrow." Then the door went up. Canvases, stacked 6 deep against every wall. Portfolios tied with string. Rolls of paper standing in a barrel like umbrellas. 40 years of a man drawing every single day and having nowhere to put it and no one to show it and doing it anyway. Diane put her hand flat against the cold metal of the door frame, and she made that sound again, the low one, the one from the night before. And this time, it didn't stop. "Miss Vance," she said, "you've been doing this whole time, while we all walked past you." "It's just a thing I do," Elias said. She turned on him, and she wasn't gentle now, she was fierce. "Stop saying that. I need you to stop saying that today, because in 3 weeks a great many people are going to say it back to you, and you are going to have to believe them." Meanwhile, up on the 19th floor, nothing had changed at all. That was the part that would haunt them later, when it came out, that all through those 3 weeks, while a gallery owner was cataloging a masterwork by hand, the office kept right on going. Trevor Dunn still called him Picasso. On the Wednesday of that week, Trevor stood at the break room counter with a plastic fork and mimed painting the air, slow and dreamy, eyes half shut. And the table laughed, and Kayla told him to stop. "He's harmless." And Trevor said, "That's the point." And they laughed again. Brett Halloran walked past the supply closet and said nothing. Because to Brett, the janitor had already been dealt with, filed, closed. A thing you drop in the trash doesn't need thinking about twice. They didn't know. They had no idea. And that gap between what they thought they'd buried and what was actually happening 2 floors down, that gap is the whole story. Everything after it is just the gap closing. The show opened on a Thursday night. Wexler Contemporary took up the ground floor of the same tower Elias mopped. He'd waxed that lobby 1,000 times. He'd run the buffer over that marble at 2 in the morning with his earbuds in. And now there was a velvet rope across the elevator bank, and a girl with a clipboard and a wall of light spilling out through the glass, and inside, on the far wall, under a single warm lamp, hung a drawing of a woman asleep on a bus, with a small brown bird in the corner. The one from the Chicago auction had been graphite. This one was the twin of it. Diane had hung it dead center. And to the right of it, in a plain frame, coffee rings still faint in the corner, where the grounds had soaked in 11 days before it was rescued from a trash can, hung the drawing Brett Halloran had thrown away. Elias came in a pressed shirt. Nora had ironed it. She stood next to him in the only dress she owned, and she would not let go of his sleeve, and he did not ask her to. "Grandpa," she whispered, "that's your bird. That's on the wall." "I know it," he said. "There's a price on it. Don't look at the price." She looked at the price. The room filled. Collectors, most of them, people who bought and sold the way other people breathe, and among them a thin man in a gray suit with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, moving from piece to piece, with his hands clasped behind his back, saying nothing, taking a long time. That was Paul Renfro. Elias didn't know the name. In the art world, the name meant a great deal. A word from Renfro made careers, or ended them. And Renfro had not said a word about a living artist in praise in longer than most people in that room could remember. He stood in front of the bust drawing for 4 full minutes. People noticed. People stopped talking and started watching Renfro watch the wall. And finally Renfro turned to the little circle that had gathered near him, and he took the glasses off his forehead and folded them. And he said, not loud but in the kind of quiet that a whole room leans in to hear, "This is the most honest hand working in America. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I did not think I would say that sentence again." And a woman near the door said, "Who is he? Where is he?" And Renfro said, "I have no idea. Diane's kept him locked in a vault, the clever thing." Diane crossed the room. She took Elias by the elbow, gentle, and she brought him forward into the light, this gray man in his iron shirt, and she said, "This is the artist. This is Elias Vance." Nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of quiet. It was the other kind. The kind where a room full of people who thought they'd seen everything realizes, all at once, that they hadn't. The first red dot went up at 8:40. A man Elias never got the name of stood in front of the bus drawing with his phone to his ear for a long time, and then he lowered the phone and nodded at Diane, and Diane nodded at the girl with the clipboard, and the girl came over and pressed a small red sticker onto the wall beside the frame. "Sold. How much?" Nora whispered. She was gripping his sleeve so hard it pulled. Diane came by a minute later and crouched a little to be at their height, and she said it to Nora, not to Elias, because she'd already understood who the money was really for. $240,000, Diane said. "For that one drawing." "Honey." "For that one." Nora's mouth opened and nothing came out. Two more sold before 10. A stairwell in charcoal, the one from the fire stairs on the 26th floor, the light coming down through the safety glass, and a portrait of a girl asleep at a kitchen table with a school book under her cheek, Nora, 4 years younger, though only the three of them in the room knew it. Diane had priced that one high and taken it down almost at once, and told Elias later she'd bought it herself, because some things shouldn't hang in a stranger's house. By the end of the night, Diane had a legal pad with numbers on it, and she sat with Elias in the back office after the last collector left, and she turned the pad around so he could see. "This is a first appraisal," she said. "Rough, conservative, the storage unit, all of it, everything you've made." She tapped the bottom of the page. "Somewhere near $1.9 million, Mr. Vance, and that number will only go up." Elias looked at the page for a long time. Then he said, "How fast can I move some of it? The real money." "Tonight's. The wire for the drawing clears in a few days." "Why? My granddaughter's deposit is due in 9 days." "Was 21. It's 9 now. $14,200, or she loses the seat." He said the number the way he'd carried it. Exact. Memorized. A stone he'd been holding in his mouth for 2 weeks. "That comes first. Before anything. Before I fix a thing in my own life. That's the first check." Diane wrote it down. And then she reached across the desk and put her hand over his ink-stained one. And she said, "It's the first check." He wired Nora's deposit the following Monday, the morning it cleared. $14,200 gone out of an account that had held under $900 the week before. He did it at the kitchen table on Nora's laptop while she was at school. And when it was done, he sat there and looked at the shut-off notice under the strawberry magnet. And then he took the notice down, and he paid that too, and then he threw the notice away. That one he was happy to throw away. He didn't buy himself anything. Not that week. Not for a while. Now, if the story ended there, it would be a good story. But it doesn't end there, because arrogance doesn't go quietly. And a certain kind of man, when he sees worth walk past him that he was too small to recognize, does not feel shame. He feels robbed. The arts segment ran on a Friday. A local station, then a bigger one, picked it up. Cleveland Janitor revealed as anonymous master. The frozen frame was Elias's face, from the opening night, next to a number. $240,000 and the word Sparrow. Brett Halloran saw it Saturday. And Brett Halloran did not think, "That poor man, look what I did." Brett Halloran thought, "That was drawn in my building." On Monday, he called a lawyer. On Tuesday, a letter came to Wexler Contemporary on Hartwell Meridian Group letterhead, and it said that the notebook and its contents constituted work product, created on company premises, on company time, using company breaks, by a company employee, and that the Hartwell Meridian Group asserted an interest in any proceeds, and that all sales were to be frozen pending review. Diane read it standing up, and then she sat down. She called Elias. He was mopping the 19th floor. He answered on the 4th ring, quiet as ever, and she read him the letter, and there was a silence on the line, and then Elias said the thing she would remember. "He threw it in the trash," Elias said, "in front of 40 people. He held it over the can, and he called it my masterpiece, and he dropped it in. And now he says, it's his." "Yes," Diane said. "That's exactly what he says. Can he do that?" No, Diane said. And here her voice changed, because Diane Wexler had spent 25 years in a business full of people who tried to take things, and she knew the shape of this one, and she knew she would win it. No, he cannot. And I'm going to tell you why, and then I want you to stop worrying, because worrying is not your job anymore. It's mine. The storage unit had been rented for years. There were dated receipts. There were canvases with dates on the back. In Elias's own hand, going back decades, years before Hartwell Meridian Group existed as a company. Years before Elias had ever pushed a mop through that lobby. The bus drawing that sold for $240,000 had a twin that had sold in Chicago 11 years ago. And the Chicago lot had a date on it. And that date was during a stretch when Elias had been working at a different building across town, which the payroll records, Brett's own company's records, would prove. His own paperwork sinks him, Diane said. The notebook he tried to throw away is dated. The storage unit is dated. And the video, Mr. Vance, the video his own employee took, the one they all laughed at and shared floor to floor, that video is now the clearest possible proof that the Hartwell Meridian Group treated your work as worthless garbage and threw it in a trash can in front of 40 witnesses. He can't call it valuable company property now. He's on camera calling it trash. There was a silence. He'd want that video gone, Elias said slowly. He would love that video gone, Diane said. It is the best thing that ever happened to your case. Trevor Dunn made you the strongest evidence you have, and he captioned it himself. The claim collapsed in 9 days. Brett's own lawyer, a competent man handed a bad hand, told him privately what Diane had said publicly, that the video and the dated work turned the whole thing into a liability. That pressing it would only put Brett on a witness stand explaining to a jury why he'd thrown a master's life work into a garbage can and mocked a man for it. Brett withdrew the letter. Quietly, no apology. Men like Brett don't apologize. They simply stop. But the story wasn't done paying out. Because a claim collapsing in a lawyer's office is a small thing. The office learning what it had done, that was a public thing, and it happened in public, in the very room where the wound was made. The break room. The following Monday. 15 minutes into the first break of the week. The television in the corner, the one that ran the building's silent channel all day, had been switched over to the news by somebody, and the arts segment ran again. The follow-up, the bigger station, and there was Elias's face on the screen next to the number, and there was the drawing with the coffee ring, and there was Diane Wexler calling him one of the most important artists in the country. Trevor Dunn was at the counter with a plastic fork in his hand. He'd started it. All of it. The name. The stirrer flicked onto the fresh mopped floor. The video. He was the one who'd filmed Brett holding the notebook over the trash, and he was the one who'd captioned it, the janitor's masterpiece lol, and sent it into the group chat where it went floor to floor to floor. He stood there with the fork in his hand, and he watched the number on the screen. $240,000. And under it, the word he'd used as a joke for 2 years without ever once bothering to learn it, meant something. Sparrow. Nobody laughed. That was the thing Trevor noticed first. The table where they always laughed just didn't. Kayla was looking at the screen with her hand over her mouth. Somebody said, quietly, "Wait, that's the janitor? That's Picasso?" And nobody answered, because the answer was on the screen, and the answer had a price on it, and the price was more than any of them made in a year. Trevor put the fork down. He took out his phone. For a second, it looked like he might do what he always did. Might film it, might caption it, might make it small. But he looked at the phone in his hand. And then he looked at the screen, and something in his face went slack and gray. And he put the phone back in his pocket. He didn't take it out again. Not that day. Not in that break room ever again, as it turned out. The laugh died where it was born, right there at the counter where it started. And nobody in that room ever called Elias Vance Picasso again, because it had stopped being an insult and turned into a thing they were ashamed to have said. Elias didn't come up to the 19th floor that day. Diane had asked him to take the week. He'd said no at first, 22 years you don't just not show. But she'd talked him into it, so he wasn't there to see it. Which is right. A man like Elias was never going to stand in a doorway and watch them squirm. That was never who he was. But Brett saw him one more time. It was over the master keys. Elias had given notice. Diane had insisted, and for once he'd let himself be insisted on. And the keys had to go back to the office manager. In person. That was the rule. So on his last Friday, Elias went up to the 19th floor in his good coat, the storage unit coat. And he walked the long hallway one last time. The same hallway he'd walked after the trash. 40 faces watching then. And this time the faces watched too. But they watched differently. He knocked on Brett's door. Brett stood up too fast when he saw who it was. And here is where a man like Brett shows you exactly who he is. Because he did not say sorry. He had seen the number and read the letters and lost the claim. And now the janitor was standing in his doorway, worth more than the whole floor. And Brett Halloran looked at all of that, and the only thought his mind could produce was, how do I get a piece? Elias, he said, and he'd never once used the first name before. Elias, sit down. Listen, look. What happened? That was a misunderstanding. That was all in good fun. You know how the floor is. But listen, you need someone in your corner now. Someone who knows the business side. People are going to take advantage of a guy like you. I could. I've got a head for this. I could represent you. Manage things. Keep the sharks off. We could. Elias let him finish. He was polite like that. Then Elias set the ring of master keys down on the desk. Quiet, the little click of the metal on the wood, the loudest thing in the room. And he said one of the few full sentences anyone at Hartwell Meridian Group ever heard him say. You already told me what to stick to. Brett didn't understand for a second. And then he did. Stick to the mop. Rembrandt, his own words, said over a trash can, on a video that had gone floor to floor, the words he'd wanted more than anything to make disappear. Elias. But Elias had already turned. He walked back down the long hallway, unhurried, the same pace he'd always kept. And he did not look at any of the faces. And he went down in the elevator he'd cleaned 10,000 times, and he walked out through the marble lobby he'd waxed at 2 a.m, past the velvet rope where his own drawing had hung, and out into the afternoon. He left Brett Halloran standing in an office, holding nothing. The thing Brett had mocked was now worth more than his salary, and it had walked out the door, and none of it, not one line of it, had ever been his. The last of the qualified voices came a few weeks later, and it was the one that sealed the name. Marguerite Osei was a curator, a museum curator, the kind whose word turns a private sale into a permanent record. She had been in the trade for a long time, and she had, like everyone in the trade, spent 11 years wondering about the sparrow. She came to the gallery on a quiet afternoon with a catalog under her arm, the Chicago catalog, from the auction, 11 years old, and she asked to see the notebook, the actual notebook, the one with the taped spine. Diane brought it out. Elias was there. Diane had called him in. He stood by the wall in his coat and watched a stranger open a book that had ridden on the shelf of a supply cart for years. Osei set the old catalog on the table. She opened it to the lot. The bust drawing, graphite, the sparrow in the corner. Then she opened the notebook beside it. To any page, it didn't matter which. And there was the same bird, made by the same hand. She looked back and forth between them for a long moment. And then she straightened up. And she looked around the gallery at the collectors and the 2 younger curators she'd brought with her. And she said it plainly, so that everyone in the room would hear it and it would be on the record. Sparrow was never lost. She turned and looked at the gray-haired man by the wall. He's been here the whole time. Cleaning a building. While the rest of us wrote articles wondering where he'd gone. She shook her head slowly. He never went anywhere. We just weren't looking at the man holding the mop. And the room turned. All of it. Every face. And looked at Elias Vance. He didn't like it. You could see he didn't like it. He'd spent 58 years being the man nobody looked at. And being looked at by a whole room was, to him, a kind of weather he'd never learned to stand in. He nodded once. He said thank you. And that was all. That was all anybody was going to get. And by now they all understood that the not saying was part of the thing. The scarcity was the man. 8 months went by. The studio was on the second floor of an old building on the near west side, with big north windows, the kind of light a painter would sell a kidney for. And Elias hadn't sold anything for it. Diane had found it, and the money had bought it outright, cash, his name on the deed. It smelled of turpentine and, most mornings, of toast, because Nora came by before class and made toast on the little counter, and left crumbs everywhere, and he never once complained about the crumbs. Nora was at art school. The seat had held. The $14,200 had cleared with 12 days to spare, and she'd started in the fall, and she came home talking 100 miles an hour about things called negative space and color temperature. And Elias listened to all of it, and sometimes quietly told her she had it a little wrong, and she'd go quiet and fix her drawing. Because her grandfather turned out to be the most honest hand working in America, and it seemed like a good idea to listen to him. Her acceptance letter was framed on the studio wall. Not his reviews. Not the Renfro quote that galleries 3 cities over now printed on their walls. Her letter. That was the one he framed. He still liked the quiet. That never changed. He turned down more than he took. Diane learned to only bring him the shows that mattered, and even then he'd sit in the back and leave early. He didn't want the rooms. He'd never wanted the rooms. He'd wanted, the whole time, exactly what he had now. A window that was his, a girl who was safe, and time in the morning to draw before the day started. As for the others, Brett Halloran got his leadership review. The video, Trevor's video, the one of him holding a master's life work over a trash can and calling it garbage in front of 40 people, made its way, eventually, to the people at Hartwell Meridian Group, whose job it was to worry about how the company looked. It did not go well for Brett. He is, last anyone heard, no longer the alpha of any floor. Trevor Dunn deleted his account. All of it, everywhere. The caption video had a way of following him, getting reposted with new words on it, and the new words were never kind to Trevor. One morning the account was just gone. He is a quieter person now, they say. It's amazing what a thing like that will teach a person, if the person is willing to learn it, and if he isn't, well, the internet is patient. And Elias. 8 months on a bright morning with the north light coming in, and Nora's crumbs on the counter, and the smell of toast and turpentine, Elias Vance sat at a table by his own window with a fresh notebook, the pages still white, and he drew. A woman on a bus, from memory, her head against the glass, and in the corner, without thinking, the way he'd done since he was a boy, without once considering that it was worth anything to anyone, he drew a small brown bird. Because here's the thing about worth. It doesn't shout. Some people carry the whole of it quietly, for years, right past you in a gray uniform, with a mop and a taped-up notebook under their arm, and they never once ask you to notice. They just leave it up to you. They let you decide, all on your own, whether you were the kind of person who looked closer or the kind who laughed. So tell me, in the comments, who's the quiet one you underestimated?